Hello and welcome to the 7th session of Qwernomics, path-dependency, and semiotic fatality with Nick Land. I'm going to pass the mic off to him now.
Thanks, Theodore. So I don't know whether I should be apologizing for this time or whether it's just actually the first time everyone else has been in a good time slot. But anyway, it's definitely anomalous. And no one's had much time for sort of intermediate reflection since the last session. So let's see how this goes. So I was going to start off by just introducing a very kind of down-to-earth element and then maybe driving us straight over the cliff, because I thought after 6 weeks of painstaking sobriety and theoretical caution, we might have a little bit nuts with some of this stuff. But the sober side is something that I think definitely applies to the I'm just going to put a couple of links in here for people. The introduction to this is, I thought, a really interesting quote, and interesting partly because it's typical. You can find it all the time, or sort of things like it. And it comes, let me see whether that was included. No, it wasn't. Hang on, I'm going to put that in now. So coming from this actually fixed, from this Hackaday article, which is itself just basically a kind of report on other stuff, which I've included in the link. But it starts, the very first sentence is, there are very few things that are surrounded with as much hearsay and rumor as the layout of type keyboards. And I think this is a really, sorry, I seem to have just double posted something by mistake. Oh no. It's a kind of an understated element, but it's one of the ways that we could have really gone on this material, of just seeing QWERTY as a mythological motor and producing this particular set of prevalent myths or things that are then retrospectively treated as myths. And obviously, if you look at the dates of this kind of theory, the thing I'm going to just very, very briefly talk about now, because it's actually concretely and empirically complicated, so you can get a general sense of what's being said, but the details of it are overwhelming. Actually, is this work by Yasuoka, two Yasuokas actually, and this was dated from 2011, so it actually post-dates the Qwernomic in its economic and technical form that we've reached the bedrock of the first half of this course. It was material, it was a theory that was just not engaged in discussion. And I think it's quite interesting in a number of ways. But in an absolute nutshell, what this Yasuoka paper argues is that the Qwernomic argument that this pool of typing competencies acted as a control and a lock-in mechanism for QWERTY, so that one had a kind of QWERTY competent typing population that then meant the keyboard layout could not migrate. It was had to cater to this actual established population of skills. The Yasuoka argument pushes that back a whole level and says that the origin of the keyboard and of QWERTY came in a context that already included a pool of established typing competencies been established by telegraph technology. Where it then gets a little bit empirically demanding, and as I say, goes beyond purchase on. But their argument, because of the peculiarities of American Morse, which was a specific, highly culturally diffused cultural of Morse code competence with its own characteristics, that the typing population competent in this system who'd been raised on set keyboard, and that certain key arrangements were favored because they were compatible with this existing typist skill set. So in a certain sense, this argument is a radicalization of the Qwernomic argument as we seen it, of saying it's not that QWERTY quickly this pool of typing competence, but rather there was a pool of typing competence that already controlled the emergence and settled the arrangement of QWERTY. And so this goes in a number of directions. I mean, one of the directions, obviously, just that it model of lock-in based on this theory, the existence of a cultural population as a controlling or constraining influence on the development of a particular technological system. And secondly, it becomes probably the most stark example of this retrospective technology, because saying the posed by people trying to split up this letter pairs for language is itself a myth. So QWERTY had produced, and reflection upon QWERTY had produced this very definite, distinctive logical system that is now being framed from a kind of subsequent theoretical position. So I think this stuff just needs to be put on the list. It's really a first module type material, and I think, as I say, if people take it seriously, it's quite a demanding, theory, but it definitely claims to explain the position of certain letters based upon their inherited competences in relation to the American Morse system. But I was hoping today to plunge right into the depths of what I think could be described as the extreme Qwernomic thesis, which is basically that QWERTY is the revelation of a transcendental cognitive engine. And I think the kind of starting point maybe for this is like with the question why. Okay, this is a local question because of the way we're approaching this, but why is the geology of morals such an extraordinarily intractable piece of writing? And I'll just quote something that I think captures that a little bit. Where they're in narrative mode, they or it or whatever, the voice of the text, and it says, the audience rather sulkily denounced the numerous misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and even misappropriations in the professor's presentation, despite the authorities he had appealed to, calling them his friends, even the Dogons, and things would presently get worse. The professor cynically congratulated himself, taking his pleasure from behind, but the offspring always turned out to be runts and wrens, bits and pieces, if not stupid vulgarization. Besides, the professor was not a geologist or biologist. He was not even a linguist, ethnologist, or psychoanalyst. Whatever his specialty had been was long since forgotten. In fact, Professor Challenger was double articulated twice, and that did not make things any easier. People never knew which of him was present. He, in question mark, claimed to have invented a discipline he referred to by various names: rhizomatics, stratoanalysis, schizoanalysis, nomadology, micropolitics, pragmatics, the science of multiplicities. Yet no one clearly understood what the goals, methods, or principles of this discipline were. So I think in all kinds of ways that's a sort of weird, it's a weird passage, and it's sort of deliberately designed to generate a confusion that it doesn't undo. It's not like there's some narrative resolution to this later, and the confusion that it's referring to is something that is then resolved or dissipated by conclusions later in the text. And so we kind of might ask, well, what ultimately is the source of this confusion? And I think that the answer to that takes us to transcendental philosophy, and the fact that as we've sort of touched upon before when on this material previously, there's no difference between the set of ultimate criteria, cognitive competencies, cognitive resources that might be drawn upon in order to accomplish the construction of a scientific or philosophically rigorous stratoanalysis, and the machinic assemblage that produces the strata. Like these, there's no difference of level. There's no transcendent theoretical resources. All the theoretical resources, all the cognitive resources that can possibly be accessed are themselves going to be products of the machine under investigation. So the confusion, and obviously they call it's a confusion that they systematically call schizophrenia, is a straightforward result of the imminence of the undertaking. That there's no structure of mentality that is in a position of transcendent authority in relation to the material under investigation. So that's the in philosophical mode how to describe the problem. So for us, I think that this translates straightforward, as I say, into what is, I think, the most extreme thesis that one can make about our object here, that it is also the transcendental cognitive resource accessible to us in tackling the material. That once again, there's no difference of level. In passing from a kind of a sober, I think deeply uncontroversial mode of historical Qwernomics into the extreme Qwernomic thesis, one is passing this threshold of immanentization and saying that ultimately the cognitive machinery that we are trying to put into play has to come out of our object. There's the actual, what last week I was describing as the abstract apocalypse that generates the QWERTY distribution is itself at an ultimate level of I could say cognitive authority, or it's the final deposit of cognitive resources available to us. So this is obviously pitched at an extremely abstract level. So I'll try to actually give an example of how I think this might. Okay, I'll venture saying make sense, but I think that that's probably something that would need to be withdrawn further down the line. Okay, putting it in order is something that is not yet confidently done, but I think I'll go this way around. So we've continuously, in sort of just engaged in a sensible analytic procedure in relation to the QWERTY keyboard, I think consistently found that there is this, that it consists of 4 rows. It breaks down the alphanumeric series into these 4 groups that are stacked, and that the top of these, the top row, the numerals, have a number of very distinctive features that seems to separate them out in all kinds of ways from the rest of the keyboard. And I don't know whether I need to go across all of those. It's a closed set in a number of different ways. It's highly continuous with the alphanumeric series. All 10 numerals are grouped together right at the beginning, just as they are in the alphanumeric series. Then the numerals are not, the numeral keys are distinctive in the fact that they, as we've seen, each has 2 characters on it, not just one. They don't operate, there's no, well, I'm now going to get into the main thing, which is to say there's a whole other level that we can get to about where this distinction happens, which is to do with the phenomenon of case, upper and lower case. Now, upper and lower case wasn't something that you found on the very earliest keyboards. I actually had a date for when this was introduced, but I think I've probably lost it. But I'm going to just take it as part of the system we're looking at. And I think it's a valuable resource. It obviously differentiates. The numerals do not have case, unlike all the other characters. And so it's tempting in some way, at least to ask sort of tentatively, is the relation of case, of upper and lower case, a stratic relationship that cuts across in another dimension to the ones that we've been looking at, like between upper and lower case letters? Is there a relationship of content and expression. And one might even go further and say, is there an extremely compelling model of the relationship between content and expression to be found in the relations of case between the characters? What the reasons we might want to say this, starting with the most obvious, I think, is the fact that the uppercase version of every character is the one that is expressed on the key concerned, and the lowercase version of the character therefore is in the role of content. So you find the in a way that is kind of a classic version of this as it comes out of the history of semiotics, as it comes out of Hjelmslev, as it continues to have these kind of Saussurean echoes or resonances, which are obviously being reordered and even dispelled by what Deleuze-Guattari are doing with Hjelmslev. But it seems to be that the uppercase characters are in a certain sense the sign for the lowercase character. So you press uppercase Q and you type lowercase q. Lowercase q then seems to be like the content, and uppercase q seems to be like the expression. And one of the things that come out of this, I think, this tentative hypothesis, is that some of the relations between different strata that Deleuze and Guattari talk about seem to be captured by this relationship between case. Because, for instance, they say, especially on the physico-chemical strata, the relationship between content and expression often takes the form of simple magnitude. So that this is repeated a number of times. Sorry, one second. Let me just, I'm sure I must have made a reference to this. Okay, sorry, I'm not going to slow us down. I'll get back to this later. But obviously you can see that the relationship between uppercase and lowercase letters have this same that in some cases it's basically just that the lowercase letter just looks like a smaller case, a smaller version of the uppercase letter, and other times the relation of resemblance is far less obvious, or it's certainly can't be just managed entirely by this sense that the relationship at stake is one of difference of magnitude. And so the lesson that comes from that straight away is just to say that you cannot recklessly generalize from the relation of content expression as it is found in certain cases into some kind of principle or law that applies to the relationship of content and expression in general. So I think it's just to say the relation between the upper and the lowercase series of letters acts as a kind of warning or corrective towards that over hasty sense of finding some regularity and seeing it applying across the whole domain of the phenomenon. There's obviously a question for me that immediately jumps out is, well, is this variation between the type of relation that you find between the upper and lowercase letters something that systematically is subject to a systematic pattern of distribution across the keyboard? I'm not sure. I don't jump to any particularly firm conclusions about that. It is, I think, noticeable though that almost all the cases in almost all the cases of the keys on the bottom row, this is true. I think a B and N are the only letters which don't have this simple relation of scale organizing the relationship between the upper and the lowercase characters. And I think it's also true that if we go back to the alphabet, there's a pattern that's very distinctive, which is that the early letters in the alphabet have much greater variation between content and expression, or between case, than the later letters in the alphabet, and therefore there's room for confounding on this. That if we find some pattern in the QWERTY keyboard, it might just be a pattern based on whether we're talking about early or late alphanumeric letters, rather than anything specifically about this phenomenon. So anyway, the first step of this is just to say, if you take case as an important clue, it's kind of tempting to say that the basic diagram that you find in the keyboard consists of three megastrata defined by the letter keys, and a row that is adjacent to the system, but is in some important sense outside, that is defined by the numerals, because the numerals do not exhibit an intrinsic phenomenon of direction between content and expression. And I think by taking one more step, we can push this a little bit further. So the geology of morals obviously is about a number of things, but one of the things it's about is double pincers. And double pincers is a particular way of describing phenomenon of double articulation. We've seen that they themselves choose this lobster photo for the opening image plate of the text. They say overtly, God is a lobster. It doesn't seem to me too preposterous a stretch to then say, well, what about Cancer? Cancer, the astrological Cancer, and look at that sign. Is the sign of Cancer a sign of the strata? Cancer, obviously the crab, a kind of two-part image that has this relation of kind of symmetry or opposition or compensation. We might want to sort of explore exactly what that way. It obviously has it echoes in all kinds of ways. It seems a little bit like a kind of yin yang symbol, which is also about complementarity, doubleness, compensation, these kind of phenomena. Yes, exactly. That's the first. So let's just go down to to the stratic component of the keyboard, and look at it with one clue. And the clue I want to suggest is this, is that strata are systems of inconsistency. That you define a strata process by the fact that its elements are characterized by what Deleuze and Qwerty call relative deterritorialization, by the fact that they're unsettled and resettled. There's a process of compensation involved. There's a counter process for the process concern, and why it's double articulated is exactly because of this structure of compensation, which we can carry into cybernetics. That whole zone of classical cybernetics that is to do with compensatory systems, I think, is the same topic as the topic of stratoanalysis. And so distinctively among the levels of the keyboard is the fact that, as Amy has said, our cancer signs on the numerical row are consistent between the alphanumeric series and the QWERTY series. So if we're saying, just to repeat, strata are phenomena of systematic inconsistency, then this is another reason why we would want to say that the numeral row is not in the same sense as the rest of the system a model of a stratic assemblage. It's rather that the system of the strata is put in relation to something that is not in itself, certainly to the same extent, stratified. What do we find in the actual stratic segment of the keyboard? Well, I want to just quote one other little section of the Georgia Mars. They say, machinic assemblages are simultaneously located at the, this is page 73 in my version, located at the intersection of the each strata beacons. So what are these things? Well, here's my hypothetical suggestion, and I don't expect people to kind of swallow this without extreme reservation and suspicion. So we're into a zone of extremely speculative Qwernomic analysis at this point. But I think there is a very, very special role characters whether this comes up. I think these are our assemblages that are rotating in all direction like beacons, and they are our version of the cancer sign as we find it in the strata, like the version that we've already seen that we find among the numerals. Maybe I'm reluctant to say on the plane of consistency, but in some ways we're being told it's a plane of consistency. It's a plane of consistency because it is in fact consistent. That between the alphanumeric and Qwernomic distribution, there is consistency in the order of these elements. Well, what do we find when we look at these stratic versions? We find systematic inconsistency. Because we're only dealing with a small set of elements, we're not talking about anything that is probabilistically mind-bending. You simply cannot get anything probabilistically mind-bending with 4 elements. As we've seen, the mode of arithmetical calculus for this is based on factorials, and 4 factorial is only 24. So the most improbable outcome that you can reach arithmetically is a 1 in 24 chance. That's not going to sort of, I think, throw anybody into a state of kind of epistemological delirium. It's a kind of slight oddity at that level, but it's still, I think, Charity, look at the orders, and in the Qwernomics series, possible consistent ordering between any of those elements. Because the QWERTY is completely inverted. So if you consider them to be kind of operators of various cybernetic stabilizing relationships, there is absolutely no structure involving those elements that can be formulated consistently. If they work one way round in the alphanumeric series, they work the opposite way round in the QWERTY series, and therefore they have this double resonance, I think, with the Cancer sign. They double resonance because obviously they have a kind of echo in terms of resemblance. They're little pincers, but also they echo because structurally and formally and systematically they are compensatory. That every ordered version of these signs in the alphanumeric series is precisely compensated by the equivalent order of them that you find in the QWERTY series. So okay, I'm basically I'm reaching max schizo at this. I just want to really say, to sort of bring it home a little bit, that what this is all attempting to explore is to what extent the Qwernomic system is a transcendental cognitive resource. So it's just to say that there's no upstairs from QWERTY in terms of the theoretical formulation of our problem of Qwernomics, but I think generally of stratoanalysis. That the confusion, the absolute delirious quality of the geology of morals is due to the fact that there is no upstairs. That once you in this thing of exploring, well, what is the actual set of diagrammatic compulsions that we're inheriting from the keyboard, you've reached the absolute upper limit of cognitive capability. There's no way you can go to get leverage on those, to get some kind of superior adjudication of any of the conclusions that you might be reaching on that basis. And that's why we're just thrown into this same position that Challenger's audience is thrown into, that there is no superior authority available to us. So obviously this is, as I say, it's the extreme Qwernomic thesis. I'm not remotely trying to argue that people should feel radically compelled by the inevitability of this as something that just is self-evidently true. But what it is suggesting is that our kind of persistent questions throughout this class up to this point about, well, what is this for, even if we accept that there is this thing, there has been this abstract apocalypse, there is this massive introduction of this cultural entity that we're trying to explore, what does it do? This is the tentative approach to that question. What it does is it provides us with a ultimate transcendental cognitive toolkit for stratoanalytical investigation, of which you cannot ascend from this position. There's no upstairs from this. It's all that you have, and so that the actual highly obscure historical stratodynamic process from which we have inherited the keyboard is the same process that has provided us with all the cognitive resources that we can conceivably gain access in investigating our object. But I'll stop now and see what people think about this or other things.
Hey.
Hi.
I don't know if everyone else was getting the kind of the audio that was glitching in and out like I was.
Oh yeah,
but,
apologies. Yeah.
Oh, it's it's not your fault. But can you maybe just go over so I can absorb it a bit better? The kind of relationships that you're talking about stabilizing and I assume excitatory relationships between these pairs. Can you go back over that? Because I kind of missed huge chunks of it, and it's obviously super important.
Well, okay, look, the clue for me on this is just this notion, which I don't think is intrinsically a problem as an interpretive step, which is to say that the definition of strata is systematic inconsistency. And systematic inconsistency in the sense of compensation. So to take one little further step of this, that this is what, when you look at the Cancer sign, what you're seeing is a model of compensation. That's why that it's a double pincers. One pincer compensates what the other pincer does. You always need these two relationships. One counterbalances, one re-equilibrates, one compensates for the other. And so in your example, so you look at this, it's, I think I utterly agree. Of course, if you're going to say, well, where is the little crab on the numerical section of the keyboard? There's just no doubt about it. Of course, the 6 and 9 are the decimal drawing of Cancer, without a doubt. They have this all the same relationships in terms of image, but more than just image, also the conceptual and system dynamic content of those signs are repeated faithfully in those two characters. And what we find, of course, is that numeral segment of the keyboard is consistent between the alphanumeric and the Qwernomic distribution. So six comes before 9 in both cases. There's the relevant one for us here. If you then take this further step, that the elements rotating in all direction like beacons and acting as the, for our little analysis, in the strata are the characters B, D, P, and Q, though radically inconsistent. There's no, if you take that as your entire vocabulary, just for the sake of our little toy system now, say the only letters that you have, all you're thinking about and focusing on, P, D, and Q. You write a word. Without any constraints, disordered in QWERTY. No construction of any kind that you can make using the letters B, P, D, and Q, however small, that is ordered, that is consistent in both the alphanumeric and QWERTY distributions. So that's to say, between those four characters, which is scattered, as we've seen, across all four of the letter rows, none of them are like 6 and 9. There is no equivalent to 6 and 9. They all, rather than having a consistent or they don't, there's no relation of reinforcement or kind of cybernetic amplification possible between them. The only relationships that is allowed by the system is compensatory or reterritorializing. Sorry, I don't know whether my audio is still totally glitching out.
It's just slightly.
So the like lesson in the QWERTY system is that we've been kind of levered out of any regime of compensatory cybernetics, dynamisms. That's the kind of teleological secret of the QWERTY organization.
Sorry, Amy, you're watching out. Just repeat that sentence.
So what QWERTY kind of tells us is that the compensatory cybernetic system is no longer an organizing principle of the post-QWERTY regime.
I might need to hear more about that. I mean, what for me, what is said by this is that the compensatory stradic dynamics are diagrammatically included QWERTY system in such a way that we can see the break between the numerals, in which is a consistent series, and this little semiotic packet in the strata, which is entirely compensatory, systematically compensatory. And you know, again, sorry, just to repeat, but it's not hugely impossible. Obviously, what we're fundamentally seeing here is that numeric series B in order B, D, P, Q is obviously reversed Q, P in QWERTY, such that there's no formulation, there's no construction possible with those elements that is not inconsistent between QWERTY and the alphanumeric series. So it's like, you know, when you get right down to the nuts and bolts of it, it's not in 20 possibility that would just happen by chance. Mind-blowingly impossible. It's just you know, because the set of characters is so small. But it's neat. However sort of modest in its improbability, it's perfectly neat in the sense that you couldn't produce a more exact diagrammatic micro model of compensatory cybernetics or relative deterritorialization, and then you get in the example of these characters. So sorry, I'm just looking at Theodore's thing, and I'm not sure I'm understanding what I mean. This is a little subset of the possibilities, but obviously a lot of these are, the first one is perfectly ordered alphanumerically. I think the second one certainly is disordered both in QWERTY and alphanumerics, isn't it? The QWERTY ordered version is not there. It's QPDB. I mean,
that was just a sketch.
Okay, if it's not, I'm not taxing people's patience too much. Let me just like repeat this weird little thing, and I just want to get some feedback from people. Does it just sound completely implausible where I'm going with this? Like when they say machinic assemblages are simultaneously located at the intersection of the content and expression on each stratum, and at the intersection of all the strata with a plane of consistency. They rotate in all directions like beacons. I mean, I just cannot know, I've lost the capacity any longer not to see that as a reference to this little diagrammatic toolkit.
Jake, are you doing this?
Impossible for me to. Therefore, is sort of threatening to take these words out on this diagrammatic path. So yes, I don't know.
Sorry, I just lost that last bit that you said, Nick. I wasn't even sure if it was coming from your side.
I was probably just rambling. Just when you see an expression like double pinters, you know, after this, you know, I can't any longer not see this in it. I mean, it's like it probably is that I've just got some now deep neurological malfunction that I'm now sharing with the world. But I'm just like I am sharing it. You know, this seems to me to be this kind of little diagrammatic machine in there, and it works too well for me to stop paying attention to it.
So in the idea with, you know, the way that the BD, P, and Q are sort of the propellers in a beacon, that they have all these rotations. So the reason that we kind of think that you think that maps to the machinic assemblage is because you can have all of these different rotations that produce different configurations of of double articulation, but they still all face inwards, which is why they're always which is why they're double articulations rather than simple like relations of symmetry, is that you're looking at all the different configurations within that diagram of a double articulation. You think so? I mean,
yes, I think so.
Tensors directly references like that symbolic shape that's used to form that diagram.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's diagram. It's not I mean, it operates as an image to a certain extent, but I think it is actually a diagrammatic element rather than just an image. Already, already in the cancer sign, it's not a picture of a crab, and then when you're repeating it, it's not that it's just a picture of the cancer sign. It's a little diagrammatic construction. And
Right.
I think the way that you put it is right, for sure. And the whole system is pincered together by these elements.
Yeah, no, that's probably a pretty bad visual description. I was just sort of seeing like 6s and 9s flipping around in my head and trying to describe what was going on there. Do you think that relationship between, this sort of goes to the relation between the shape of the letters and their like phonetic and numerical relationships, like prior to QWERTY, that...
Sorry, Jake, I'm getting audio glitch. Can I just get your last sentence?
Yeah, definitely. No, so just saying, like, in terms of all of these like pre-QWERTY, potential relationships among those 4 letters, like whether it's in terms of numerics, phonetics, shape, like all of that, and that having some involvement in the diagram that's that's present implicitly in the transformation from the alphabet onto QWERTY. Like, do you think that that's partially what they're pointing to, is sort of the way all of these different relationships between these 4 get configured within the diagram of the keyboard?
Wow. So I'm sorry, Jake. I'm really, it's weird. Did you just slow down? Is anyone else getting bad audio from Jake, or is this just totally my...
I think I can hear Jake all right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Okay. If everyone can hear Jake fine, sorry, it's my problem there. I don't know what...
Is it any
why I'm having this? Yes, that was good. That was beautiful.
Oh, okay, great.
But so it's still your last sentence that I haven't...
Yeah, no worries. So I was just saying, so in terms of all of the sort of pre-QWERTY relationships among these 4 letters, so like one of them is obviously like the numerical order on the number line, which is the thing most directly transformed by being put into this diagram on the keyboard, but you also have like phonetic and shape and etc. I mean, do you think that they are making, when they sort of make this dog whistle is the wrong word, but you know what I mean, nod to this diagram, is that you think that there's content, or that they're pointing towards something more to be mined from the way that all those relationships between those 4 letters particularly get configured within the keyboard diagram?
Honestly, you're into wild jungle tracks that I can scarcely peer into. So I mean, those questions also made me utterly germane. But you see, obviously at one level, when you're asking, well, what were they trying to do, or what are they trying to say, all of this stuff, you're on the same level as you are when you're talking about the QWERTY, the genesis of QWERTY. What was Scholz trying to do, or what was the socio-psychological later people mixing the QWERTY arrangement. I think been looking at a lot of different keyboards, and it seems that the key one for the fixing QWERTY was the Remington No. 2 typewriter in around about 1882. And I don't think I think Scholz was not really involved in this. So, I'm probably over egging his involvement. But the key point is, I just think we can't know. You know what I mean? There's more or less plausible hypotheses.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I could have phrased that better. I mean, I want to like go back and retrofit and say by they I meant Legion or the strata that make up
or Professor Challenger, or
exactly,
or whatever's coming out of the machine, and returning to the machine.
I guess the better question is like, what do you think the machine is doing with all of these relations among these letters, which everybody's sort of going on about, like the alienness of Q to the others? And before that, I was looking at their numerical values and sort of the weird logical in terms of prime and power relationships that they form. You think that's sort of part of what's going on the plane of their
look,
text?
I guess what I'm saying about it is, it's like a clue, and it's a clue the fact that there do seem to be systematic packets of diagrammatic resources that are part of this apocalypse, this revelation that the QWERTY system, it seems, just in the same sense that you're digging through a genome and you find these various bits and pieces, you find chunks of old retrovirus and you find functional genes and you find all of this stuff. So this is like a certain kind of, investigative thing of this system that just digs out this chunk of code, and it looks like a suspiciously highly functional little diagrammatic. And so you can then say, well, what are all the things we can do with this machine? That's a fascinating question, and I'm not pretending to have done anything more than absolutely dip my toe in it, mostly just seeing that, oh, it looks strangely, it looks compact of clicks that we in this setup. You can obviously be like, well, that's really does, and those are the sort of questions you were raising. But the more modest thing is just to say, well, look, this kind of information is in there, then perhaps we're a little bit more robustly to hold on to something like the extreme Qwernomic thesis. Actually, we can at least conceive how structured cognitive resources can be communicated in this system. This is just one little telling example of how that might happen. And if it can happen in this case, then we can't rule it out as simply unthinkable or impossible, that there are, multiple structures of cognitive capability being kind of shipped through this cultural mechanism.
Right. This might be getting, I don't know, too esoteric, and I think there's a couple of good questions still to ask in the sidebar. Like Theo's definitely got one, but just so it doesn't seem to you resonant with the diagram of non at all.
Sorry, I'm not. What is the diagram of non? Sorry.
Well, so you've got the alien element of the G, right? And then I'm still trying to map like in my head, the numerical square of relations, but just the fact that in BDPQ you have the 5th and 6th primes, the square of 5, and twice the 6th prime as one of them, one alien element, and a reversal as well, because to create that diagram, to create that string of 4, you reversed the original, I guess it was actually a Nutericon kind of thing. And then that's also reversed on the keyboard. You got a symbolically a propeller kind of structure. I don't know. I don't know where it goes, but I could see a variety of resonances.
Yes, I mean, I guess one slight hesitation I have is that if the kind of dread features of non start kind of poking through too dramatically, it might scare people away at a premature stage.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So I have maybe a boring question, and it's sort of related to something I said earlier here too. It was, so we're calling QWERTY now, both we're calling it a transcendental generative motor, and we're saying it's sort of the immanent holism in which we find ourselves. And then on top of that, are people just not, are we no longer interested in the question of why the machine makes a machine that looks back on itself? Or is that, or are we saying that that's not even a possibility, that it's simply like a forward-moving machine?
No, I hope we're not. I hope we're not losing that. Maybe you should say more about this whole thing about the machine that looks back on it. I think this is exactly what is at stake in saying it's an imminent cognitive horizon. It's the fact that if QWERTY isn't the machine talking about itself, there is no discourse on the machine that we're ever going to find. That's again, like, obviously maybe an even more kind of cranked up version of the extreme Qwernomic thesis. But it certainly, I would want to go the direction that you're saying rather than back out of that.
Right. Yeah, I think this was something that I was feeling early in the course, was this problem of perspective. Like from what vantage point
Yes.
are we doing this analysis?
Yes, exactly.
So I mean, I have no answers, but that's a constant question for me here.
Yes, but again, I think look, we can see that from the extreme Qwernomic thesis is that there is no possible that isn't already within the processing system.
Of course, yeah. Yep.
Economics. And I do think it seems to me, maybe this is in some ways a bad word to use, but I'll use it anyway because it's kind of communicative in a crude and immediate way. Is it's resonant with the kind of problem that seems to come through in this stratoanalysis essay. That too, obviously, there's no position of purchase or overview or superior perspective possible, because the function, all those functions, the function of overviewing is itself a product of a certain sort of stratic mechanism.
Yeah.
Overviewing is itself a symptom of stratic embeddedness. So you know, learning that lesson, learning that the overview position is itself structured inside the strata is source of this narrative confusion that they're wanting to wrap the geology of morals in. And I think that totally applies to our problem too, for sure.
Yeah, this is why I think the image of the schizophrenic is so incredibly powerful. It's unable to differentiate itself from its exterior, and yet participates sometimes in a way that it does differentiate itself, maybe only as parody.
Yes, and it's not even though it's taken from the discourse of psychology, private psychology is not its ultimate frame. It's definitely something much more like the kind of cultural matrix that we're looking at. It's a self-assembling, distributed cultural machine that is incarnated at the level of a population, not at the level of an individual.
Group delusions.
Yes. Well, it's delusions is an interesting sort of ambiguous, because obviously the pretense and overview is the ultimate metaphysical. The position of confusion that is coming in Challenger's audience of, you know, what is the source of epistemological authority for this stuff? That is really the delusion, and the sort of implosion of that into this chaos and confusion is actually the realistic insight of the immanence of all criteria.
Right. I think that's just it. I would imagine that there's no way to discern what's delusion or not, in so fact that, you know, if everything is thickly assembled the way it is, there's no way to bootstrap out of that in order to say what is or is not delusion, right?
No. No, I think you can say that certain things cease to work, and so in that sense they become dysfunctional because what Deleuze and Guattari are still doing, and I think what we should still do is still critique. It's not as if it's not that you collapse into this positivistic thing of just any random statement has the same status as any other random statement. You know, certain constructions are become dysfunctional. So the critical concept like metaphysics, and its attendant vocabulary to do with transcendence and these particular types of delusion and can be employed rigorously. I think it's, you know, to just repeat into what we were talking about with Theodore, is I think that audience are really are subject to the actual process of critique. It's not that they can walk out of the lecture if they grasped it and think, oh, we were right and that we were right all along, looking at things in the same way we were before. I think they've undergone some vigorous critical process in that.
This is basically just a random side note, but like a cool observation coming from some of the previous weeks is that Young and I realized that so most laptops don't, like, they remove the numpad. The exception is gaming laptops, because that particular sort of peristratic move-in became entrenched. And so gaming laptops keep the numerical pad just for the purpose of using it for movement directions. And so it pulls back into the mix when it might otherwise have been impoverished because of something that moved in on top of it, which I thought was pretty.
Yes, I think that is a really important element. If you see sort of, you know, you just Googling around in this zone, you're very quickly diverted down these paths to do with, like, especially these WASD keys and these relationships between vectors and characters that are, as you say, introduced by the whole. It's not just the gaming world, is it? I mean, the gaming world uses them with particular intensity, but that whole sense of keys as vectors is something that I guess comes earlier than that, from just cursor control, actually.
Right. Yeah, no, like anybody who has to really navigate, has to be a keyboard jockey all the time. I think whether it's like coders or people or data entry people or something, you know, I mean, obviously, like, people who have been coding for a few years, like, depending on the software they use, might use any particular key for like virtually anything. But I think data entry people will use a lot of like navigating around a page using keys instead of instead of mouse and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a really good point.
I think it relates to things that over the last few weeks I've noticed Theodore particularly sort of insisting on, which is a certain question about dimensionality. This came in a little bit in our whole discussion about numlock and nomadic movement, because obviously one of the sort of little conceptual moves, or the kind of order words that I really like, is this whole thing about subtracting a dimension, you know, n-1 dimensions, removing a dimension in order to kind of actually explore a plane of immanence. And it's a kind of transcription I don't think it's an exaggeration. It's a transcription of the entire critical enterprise into this mode. You know, you can say that the whole, going right back to its origins, its Kantian origins, the whole critical enterprise is in a certain sense about subtracting supplementary dimensions. That what Kant does at the critique of metaphysics is remove a dimension, collapse a system down into a dimensionality of n minus 1. I much in that role in this space that as someone using, whether you're, like you say, a programmer, data entry person, anyone using this system, there is a kind of implicit supplementary dimension, isn't there, in this process of navigation? As I say, this is what I think Theodore's talking about. Like, isn't the keyboard a three-dimensional system, not a two-dimensional system? The hands hover above the keyboard, your eyes hover above the screen. There's the whole structure is overview, that you're navigating the system by looking down on it from a superior dimension and therefore directing activity across it from above or from outside, from a position of implicit transcendence. And so I think a lot of this kind of the Qwernomic undertaking, the vector of Qwernomic endeavor as critique, is about this process of dimensional collapse, where that implicit overview is subtracted, and navigation, whether it's understood as a navigation around the keyboard or navigation across the screen, is glimpsed in its immanence rather than as something that is subject to this process of oversight.
Yeah, absolutely to all of that. And I was just thinking, like, there's sort of two different third dimensions. Let's like where shift versus numlock, and like the way that, you know, for example, the way it changes the movement of our fingers in like a third spatial dimension over the keys versus this like second, like quote unquote second spatial dimension, or like second stack of mappings to the keys, which is initiated by shift or toggled by shift. And I don't know, I was just sort of trying to compare those properties in my head, because the one you just have, you start out with holes in it, right? Like the capital letters, as far as that is concerned, are just more punctuation marks that you use to indicate proper nouns, the beginning and end of sentences and things like that. And then because once you've exhausted those, you start filling up the numeral second layer with them. Whereas like the finger movement, literal spatial third dimension, is more like, it's like a fractional dimension, as if it was like, you know, it had a dimensionality of 2.7 or something like that, because you don't have like a full three-dimensional grid of keys. What you have is this sort of partial, like fractured series of edges of movement between them that aren't reducible to just two dimensions, like intrinsically, but in order to represent like a volume, you know, a sort of topologically surface. You know, it's basically, it's a volume fractal dimension.
Yeah.
Or a fractional dimension. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. No, because as you say, a fractal system is a process of dimensional collapse, isn't it? Sort of, it's an incremental dimensional collapse, is what you're seeing. At 10 to infinity on the flat dimension is the thing that is actually consuming and ultimately annihilating the higher dimensionality.
I thought in a technical sense, Mandelbrot actually defined fractals in terms of fractional dimensions, right?
Yeah.
So there's spaces which, in a mathematical, technical sense,
Are you there, Adam? think we may have lost him.
My audio might be terrible, but so sorry, it's not the usual connection today, but yeah, it was just about Mandelbrot and the definition of fractal in terms of not whole numbers, but partial.
Yeah, totally. Totally. As you say, it's an abbreviation, isn't it? Just as you say, of fractional dimension.
Yeah, I guess my question bringing that up alongside shift was just like, does shift ultimately function as the same thing in the sense that like all of these like grammatical marks that we use shift to add are like ways of breaking up or like adding another surface to like a sequence of letters and numbers that we type, which is sort of like grammar and how grammar goes? Or is it a completely different thing than the fractal dimension that we're talking about with the hands?
Yes. That has to be part of it, doesn't it? I mean, one way of representing exactly what shift does, but also the alt and control keys and all of these combinations is that they add an additional dimension, or at least they can be represented as adding an additional dimension to the keyboard, can't they? A kind of virtual superior dimension, which gives you that, so that each key becomes a stack, actually, that you navigate up and down that stack between the different characters that can be produced by that key, or characters, or in certain cases functions, or whatever, by using these other keys.
Which that key lock semantic relationship is rather wonderful there.
Yes, and it is a kind of I do think it's complicated, but this fractal reference is interesting because obviously the control keys that actually move you up and down the stack that is implicit in the keyboard as a whole are in that relationship, aren't they? Like they're distributed within a particular plane, but in those zones, the whole dimensionality of the system is metamorphosed. So they're weird zones of transference between dimensional systems.
Yeah, exactly. No, totally. When did the stuff like control and alt and function, I don't know, like how many, just chronologically, maybe we've talked about this, or it's been in the articles, and I just haven't put it all together.
They themselves are up.
Hey, Nick. I think we may have lost Nick. I'm sure he'll come back in. I'll send an email and then we can hang out here for a bit. Oh.
Hi, sorry, I was thrown off again.
That's okay.
Yeah. So was that Jake saying something, or I lost who even that was?
I didn't. I was just sort of trailing out, wondering about the add dates of different keys. Nothing significant. If somebody else has got things to talk about.
I'm following this mostly, but I'm not as familiar as you guys with Deleuze. And actually, I haven't read that particular chapter, but I've skimmed it since we started talking about it. And so I'm thinking the Qwernomics is therefore stored in the keyboard. So we could mine different parts of the keyboard as we have been doing for different parts of the theory, right? So maybe there's a map of the parts of the theory also stored in the keyboard.
Sorry, part of the story. Did you say? I missed that one word.
Part of the theory. Maybe there are different maps and different ways
Right.
of accessing different maps.
Yes. Yes, I think so.
So then,
I mean, look, this is not. Let me, just in case there's the slightest uncertainty about this. As far as I'm aware, they do not explicitly say anything remotely approximating to the extreme Qwernomic thesis. So if it seems to people that I'm pretending that this is being faithfully lifted out of Deleuze and Guattari's scripture, then that is a irresponsible impression to be making. So it's the set of analogical relations is more for sure.
the escape key might be especially important if we're moving, if it's okay to move outside of QWERTY, because it's the very first key up left and it has 3 letters on it. So there might be something interesting there.
So, sorry, I'm sorry, Anders, I missed the key term there. I apologize.
The escape key. Oh, that's all. Yes, C.
Oh, the escape key. Yes. Oh yeah. Definitely. Huge. For sure. Yeah. Definitely. I'm sort of resisting being triggered on ESC because it has so many unbelievable Kabbalistic resonances that it's a bit terrifying.
Sorry, if there's a bit of a lull, I'm not sure if the audio is okay, but there's an article, and I can't get to the normal chat, but I sent it to Facebook on Facebook.
Adam, if you send it to me, I can post it on Facebook. Or did you put it on like a Facebook page? Or if you send it to me, I can post it in the chat. That's what I meant to say.
Chogis's connection, I'd like, what's the X-Files thing? I want to believe, but I'm not sure I can quite do that. The Professor Alaska-esque key connection, I don't know. I mean, obviously, who the hell is Professor Alaska? And I was hoping after Amy dug up the actual story, which I hope everyone's had a chance to look at, that would be, unless I'm subject to some kind of traumatic amnesia, I don't think it's in there. Let me just see where I've got a link to that story. Here we go. This is the Professor Challenger story that is being played off in the Deleuze and Guattari. Yeah. Oh yeah, the water. Oh, I don't know. I'm assuming that that's kind of some really terrible joke. But yeah, definitely there though, that whole lot. Oh yes, okay. Oh, so this is, so Adam's link is tying together the zip stuff that we're talking about and Mandelbrot.
Yeah, the Mandelbrot had to do with, I think, finding the zip patterns in seemingly completely randomly generated sequences. I could be wrong about that. I don't know that much about it, but I'd be curious to hear if somebody else does.
Yes. I mean, the relationship between power laws and fractals is obviously compelling, isn't it? Because they do have these are obvious common features.
Can I ask a question about the zip thing? I just want to make sure I understand it.
Yeah.
It's unusual because, I mean, just to say the summary is the reverse order of frequency is the one over its ordinal place in the list of frequencies is its frequency, right? Which is very strange because you would expect a different type of distribution, a bell curve or any other type of distribution, right? And so having it be just a reversal of the actual ordinal seems intuitively very strange. That's what Zipf is pointing out, right?
I think that's part of it.
Well,
oh, sorry, Nick, go for.
No, you go, definitely.
I was just going to say, I think that's part of it, that it points out like the direct ordinality in frequency of use, specifically language. But it also, I think, you can see that pattern across other features of existence, I guess. So that sharp diagonal downward is a pattern that reoccurs frequently. So, yeah.
I think that seems very important. I think it seems key. I was reading last year. I was reading Number and Time by Marie-Louise von Franz, one of Jung's students, and it's a really dense book about basically like numerology, but from a Jungian psychological perspective, and how the number archetypes are in the brain. And Jung was saying that he thinks that he basically said like he thinks kind of the low-level programming language of the mind might be number, essentially. That number is maybe what is maybe underlying archetype, is that the archetypes are maybe more fundamentally number archetypes. But that implies that kind of thinking pretty strongly. So the fact that so it makes sense that you find that in the brain. There might be a kind of clicky numerologic to thought, or to the way that neural clusters form assemblages, in the way that, because they're firing ticks. But to find that in other contexts is very strange and suggests a more kind of cross-contextual kind of universal flattening, or like absolute flattening of context, with the way the information is like contaging across strata. Is that all kind of sticking to what we're talking about?
Yeah, its relevance is definitely, I think, being questioned. Your final hypothesis or whatever in the last sentence, it's not an audio problem, but I'm just not sure I completely get the last suggestion in what you're making.
I'm just saying that because that book, what she was saying in that book, Number and Time, makes sense to me, and makes sense about neuronal networks in the brain and how they could actually produce that behavior causally. Right. To find it in unrelated statistical concepts or random numbers, to find that same type of pattern that suggests this certain type of fundamental grouping and chunking that happens. It's like finding artifacts in an uncompressed image.
Well, I don't know. It's interesting because you could obviously turn that completely upside down and could say it's not because of what the brain is like that you get this kind of pattern, but this kind of pattern is what has made the brain what it is. You know, like it's back to this question again about where is the transcendental engine. You know, if the transcendental engine is the neurological structure of the brain, then you get one sort of outcome, and you can say, oh, because of what our brains are like, we get this kind of pattern, and then it's peculiar to see it somewhere else. But if it's rather that the brain is itself a construct that comes out of an engineering process at a superior transcendental level, in which these kind of power laws are basic components, then there's not such there's nothing particularly confusing about it, is there? Or it's rather the confusion is located somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, investigating that law then becomes very interesting and useful.
Yeah. I probably shouldn't digress down this line that you've opened up, which is obviously really interesting in itself, about this relationship between numbers and archetypes. I think I might be like going a little bit off our field, but I do think it's I hope we get an opportunity at some other time to look into that. I should try and check this reference. Who was the name of the writer again?
Yeah, I'll see if I can dig up that quote from Jung. I'll send it later, or put it in the sidebar later.
Right. Okay, thanks. I guess I'll look at that. There's a whole piece of kind of Qwernomic investigation going on in the sidebar that I can't pretend to be totally following. I have to try and pick that up later.
No, Chuck, it's just time. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
But maybe if I just run back on. Where mathematics school is very aligned with top-down symbolic processing and locking down
Hey, Adam, I think we've lost you. Or at least I have.
So is Adam unable to use the sidebar too?
I think Adam's on.
It's like having someone.
He's mobile right now, so.
Right. It's like lock-in syndrome, actually, of complete absence.
If since we can't hear you that easily, if you want to send me a message on Facebook, I can paste it in here. But right now we can hear nothing. Yeah, though your ghost breaking in is pretty cryptic.
Right. Yeah. I know it is very like that, actually.
Well, I found what Chagas discovered like terribly exciting, so I just want to tell you to add on to the
Yeah. Do share, because I'm not quite getting it. So
unless you want to, Chagas, are you there? Do you have talking ability?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just I don't know what you're referring to though, Jake, because I said like 3 different things.
I might have just been like chaining them all together into one giant delusion.
Okay. Yeah, I was just kind of, I guess I was just for the first time engaging in QWERTY analysis. So now I know what that is. And I was just sort of like making like random connections with the keyboard. And you guys were talking about the escape key. And then I was like thinking, I had been looking at Alaska, and I was wondering why he used C instead of K. Because like we were talking about with like typewriter before, it's all on the same row. Alaska's all on the same row too, so that was sort of weird. And I was like, oh well, what's that? Yeah, you know. And then we were talking about escape, and then escape is like geographically on the keyboard where Alaska is in the United States. And then he was saying that there's water being always lost, like this phenomena, lost saliva. And I mean, I don't know what's being lost in Alaska, but escape is what we're using to lose things on the keyboard. So I was kind of making that connection. And then you were talking, somehow we ended up talking about the 6 being an icebreaker. And then I remembered what Jake was saying earlier about the QDPP double pincer thing. And then I realized that it makes like a downwards pointing arrow, and then the upwards pointing arrow on the 6 is directly above that. And then Jake was saying that it makes this like there's like this bracketing of this dead center of nothing. Yeah, and then I was saying that it's like coffin shaped almost. It's almost like this geometric figure, and it, I don't know, almost kind of reminds me of like the end of Moby Dick for some reason too. I thought that was interesting how at the end of that chapter it ends like Moby Dick ends, with just like the coffin bobbing up, something like that.
Yeah, this is what the word free association was invented for, I think. I don't know how many steps are there. How many steps are there in that argument? Each of which have to be. Look
at all the letters. I think you can spell Queequeg on the top row, I think.
Oh yeah. That was probably a decisive factor, wasn't it? So, okay, I'm still missing a lot, though, even if I can hang on to this or set of associations there. So this coffin step is one that I'm not sure I'm holding on to.
So then, yeah, like the up arrow and the QDPP sort of forms the shape. It's almost sort of coffin shaped. These 2 different brackets pointing in a different direction. It's almost, I mean, it's closely resembling a coffin. I'm stretching it a little bit.
I'm not even quite sure what I'm supposed to be looking at. You drove Jake into such a state of mass enthusiasm. Are you on the coffin stage, Jay?
I was so I was just like thrown into it pre-coffin just by the fact that you've got this, the up arrow is like this dead center, graphically integrated, upwards pointing, like arrow thing.
Okay.
And these 4 letters, relative to which it is dead center, form a similar shape, but they lack their point and are like distributed and diagrammatic, big versus small, pointing in opposite directions. It seems like another diagram of double articulation. The coffin thing, I didn't understand what the coffin shape was initially. It just threw me onto like the narrative shape of a katabasis, like a journey in and out of hell from Q to D to B to P, which is just, now we're totally in free association zone. But
just while we're in absolutely irresponsible free association zone, the up arrow on the 6, do you think?
Say that again?
Is V of the up arrow on the 6.
Oh my God, you're right. I didn't even notice that. Shit.
I'm just going to read this little section from Through the Gates of the Silver Key, which I think exacerbates this delirium. The smoke from the tripods increased, and the crazy ticking of that coffin-shaped clock seemed to fall into bizarre patterns, like the dots and dashes of some alien and insoluble telegraph base.
Right. Yes, it has everything in it. It's true. So definitely. I'm almost surprised it doesn't mention Zipf's law, actually, given the set of references that we've had so far.
We could probably find the zip pattern in there.
Yeah.
I don't know if this will help or not, but in these types of ascents where normally we're pinned down, we're held down by rigor to keep the argument in some kind of logical progression. But when these ascents occur, it produces a kind of heady bolus of energy, and that can then be harvested for the next, with the double pincer thing, the next extraction of some type of rigorous articulation. I don't quite want to say theory because it's like this imminent kind of game or theory thing that we're talking, but kills a little bit of that headiness to say it like that.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely possible to just like have the just rats scampering crazily in all directions, which, yeah, it's probably, it's not entirely negative phenomenon, that's for sure. But I should just say, when you Miranda saying, I'm not sure whether this is going to be helpful or not, ... It's like a dramatically like ominous little turn of phrase, that I think.
Yeah, it's just my own uncertainty. Yeah, so the rats then would be going to collect little pieces or something like that. And then when they came back, you would have to sacrifice a few of them, a number of them, but then the remaining rats would have some kind of useful information. Yeah,
that's right. You need a brutal rat selection mechanism at some point in the circuit.
Yeah.
If you've got that, you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, Chogis is really going into deep schizoid Qwernomics here. I mean, that I do like that Captain Ahab thing, but at the same time, I recognize that it belongs on a secure ward as well. So it's the APAB double pinch there, isn't it? that we're supposed to be seeing.
Yeah, this is like what I was doing with the what did I call them? The cybercorns from the last class.
Oh, well, sorry, what's this?
Oh, the
this case.
schizoid direction the conversation is taken. There's
Okay.
and there's also like kind of a split between the spoken and the sidebar.
Yes, a little split. Unfortunately, I think they're converging. They're converging on a plane of swirling vortical delirium that is consistent across the whole semiotic space, isn't it?
Is that unfortunate?
It's okay, I think. I think if we can, we're at a point where we don't have to avoid being carted off for very long now. Yeah.
So, for me, the like, for example, when I said that the theory can be seen as being stored in the keyboard, or it can be mined from the keyboard imminently as we discuss it and look at these details, then it completely opens up the playing field, and then you have to ask yourself, well, what do I want to look at next? Which part of the theory do I want to develop next? So it requires a choice in order to avoid more vertical motion.
Yes. No, I think it's totally right. And trying to hold on to something that isn't swirling into chaos then becomes a kind of crucial requirement. So, I mean, I guess in a lot of sense, the predominant part of this course for me has been like, as trying to produce life rafts so that when we get to this stage of the process, we're not just, thrown straight into the howling maelstrom without any chance of recovery. But yeah, we're now on the howling maelstrom part of things. I mean, does anyone else want to chip in also for, like Theodore's asking about this kind of thing, about the history of epistemology. And it's obviously, it's a really relevant question, I think, because we are in the history of critique. Of that, I'm sort of extremely adamant that even the most delirious part of the Giorgio morals, it's got to where it is by following kind of strictly this critical, not just simply importing some source of delirium from outside, and it comes entirely from this question about, well, what is the transcendental plane? And maybe in the early history of German idealism, there's still some residual psychological image that tends to secure the sort of rigorous philosophical notion of the transcendental in a way that seems secure. It seems that it's some kind of, it's some kind of overmind, it's some kind of superior psychological cognitive plane. And it's obviously when things are thoroughly materialized, as you see happening in the geology of morals, that last security is shown to have been a kind of legacy delusion, that we're not at all talking about you know, where they're talking about the lobster god, the notion of what it is that's like anchoring the machine of cognitive production is no longer within a sort of set of psychological images that with which we can be comfortable. But I think that the actual critical process is completely rigorous, that takes you from one to the other.
I still think this is really random, but I just asked this. I mean, presumably some people do, because I just Googled a copy of The Geology of Morals. But the copy that I downloaded has stop, pause, play buttons on every single one of the pages that are clickable but don't appear to do anything. I don't know, does anyone else have that or find that really bizarre?
I don't know where that's come from. That's very interesting. Yeah, I have no idea where that's come from.
There's some interview with Deleuze where he walks through the history of philosophy, and he characterizes the history of philosophy as these certain characters, and he says something like Leibniz characterized like the philosopher as the lawyer who had to make a case and defend God.
Right.
And Kant introduces the idea of the tribunal, which is critique, as you're saying.
Right. Yeah, so you're saying there's a consistency of legal metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know whether any of you guys are familiar with Gillian Rose. She was at Warwick during the time I was there, and this for her was a huge thing. That the relationship between the construction of philosophy and legal tradition was extremely intimate, as she was concerned, and so the whole notion of the relationship between the case and the law, you know, these basic philosophical structures to do with the concrete and the particular, and in fact, I think it's no exaggeration to say that for her, philosophical conceptuality in general was all in this direct relationship to law and the development of law. So, whether or not one buys into that, it's definitely something that's striking, and you can go a long way producing a kind of persuasive case of that for sure. Here, let me just write her name.
Here's an issue which might be fruitful, is it seems like an unspoken topic that you could articulate, or one could articulate, is what is permissible to talk about, for example, in this class, or what, you know, if we're looking at the analysis of the QWERTY keyboard, we've been talking about which parts are included. Are we including, you know, the function keys? Are we including just the letters or also the numbers? Is it permissible to discuss like the letter B and the B key and the Y key, so that they're somehow related, because I can draw a line through the physical gap between G and H to link Y and B diagonally? Is that a permissible move to make or not? So what's like the minimal thing we could talk about, and then what is the effect of expanding that?
Is this?
I think it's partly a question of what's the full set of constructible methods, isn't it? So you do something like you just did with the Y and B key. Now, is that something that you can then formalize as a sort of methodical principle that would start sort of accessing insight effects, or is it something that is just, you know, that dies out like a kind of a dying fish when it tries to sort of move beyond that particular case, I think. So I don't know. I certainly obviously don't think that anyone is in a position to have a series of a priori constraints on what is or is not speculatively envisageable. I mean, that seemed, you know, I don't know where that would come from at all. So I certainly hope it doesn't seem as if I'm trying to set some kind of constraint like that on things.
Oh, not at all, not at all. I was just opening that up as an object of observation to look at, because there is, even if you haven't, of course, you didn't put any kind of limit, there's this automatic social sphere limit that we all place on ourselves, and we're in something called a class. So
Right.
everyone is trying to, that the class has a topic. So it's already polarized.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's important. Like, it's not a lot on either side. Like, you know, it might sound like melodramatic, but I honestly do think that at a certain point of, you know, coercion analysis, one is touching on these zones that just head deeply into psychotic thought processes, you know, because we're back to this thing about why do they talk about schizophrenia, you know, when you are reaching the plane of the transcendental cognitive engine, then you are, I think they're completely right, you are entering into a relationship with psychosis. And so it's inevitable that there's going to be a certain relation of caution about that, I think. And it's not ridiculous that one would, certain sort of defensive reactions and structures of caution would come along with that, I think, for sure.
Well, I think what I'm doing here is I'm proposing that as an object of inquiry. It was something to mine for more Qwernomics insights, because it's occurring in the conversation. These you know, kind of is more or less on topic, and then identifying those things as more or less on topic. Actually doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would expect it to be embedded. Again, if you're starting tentatively with the extreme Qwernomic hypothesis, that would suggest that the processes are themselves a product of this kind of stratic apparatus, and as you find these lines of destratification, you obviously are sort of departing from these forms of ordered, socially functional cognitive process into these much more delirialized, you know, these just wild particles of conception that hurtle about outside the strata. So that whole, the problematic as you're laying it out, I think is something that is in a sense folded into the actual machine that we're looking at, you know, and that machine runs psychological stability as one pole of functional stratification, and the alternative is something that you find as you approach the plane of consistency, as you follow Challenger's path. Obviously, his immobile voyage to the point where the machinic assemblage just fuses onto the plane of consistency and is totally destratified.
The way I handle that and stay sane is with myth. So, like, for example, like in the last class, I was trying to, and I was, you know, these classes are usually in the middle of my sleep time, so I'm usually kind of delirious already and zombified, and so I was trying to understand all that historical stuff in class. And to do that, I made this cybernetic unicorns that China was producing, which were the microstate islands, and how they were going to like replicate and spread across the world. So I was creating this myth to understand the complex, more imminent, detailed historical analysis. Yeah. So, and so, what's the myth of QWERTY? Is there a myth of QWERTY that we can make a kind of, you know, complex, imagistic, numinous, intuitive story, which then is not imminent, is not theory, but we can use to navigate?
Look, as we've seen, Anders, there's already this recognized QWERTY mythology, isn't there? So, for instance, you know as I'm pretty sure I've already linked it, but just let me send it again because it's so good. Where he says, you know, there are few things that are surrounded with as much hearsay and rumor as the origins of the QWERTY layout of typewriters and keyboards. So this is from this. I thought was a pretty good little intro. Sorry, I might have lost the HTTP there, as people can see. So, but to the Yasuoka thesis about the role of telegraphy in the production of the QWERTY layout. So sorry, I'm just recalling all that to say, beyond all question, ethnology and an ethnography, you know, you're not departing into wild, stormy waters of speculation in the slightest to say that. It's only when those you have successively stranger myths starting to be gestated that I think one's getting into more questionable territory or whatever. And no, questionable, of course, not being bad, but being problematic. Problematic in requiring some explicit attention to security.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that myth could be mined for scaffolding for, and we already have been doing that.
Yes, it's true. The Dogon thing is obviously definitely a good example, as Theodore's saying. You know, just the fact that obviously it comes up in this thing, doesn't it? His friend the Dogons, even the Dogons.
So just to give a heads up, we're at 5 minutes too, and I sort of have to leave on time.
Right. Sure, totally. So thanks for setting this up.
Yeah,
Theodore, this is great. So and actually, I'm glad it's been such. I've enjoyed it a lot. I was a bit worried that it was so soon after the last one. Everyone would just be cozy, but actually, everyone's been very sparked up.
Yeah, this is like my waking times right now. So, or my
that's good.
Yeah,
I understand.
So yeah, thanks everyone.
Okay, yeah. So you're actually in your evening, most people now. So it's the inverse of the usual situation.
Exactly.
So yeah, get a good night's sleep and all of that stuff. Okay, thanks guys.
Adios.
Thanks everyone very much.
Good night. Bye.
Good night. I mean, yeah. Good
Thanks.
night.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.